Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give just a minute for folks to get into our Zoom room, and then we'll get started. We're at 1 minute past the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. You've joined us for Sacred Knowledge, Modern Healing, an Introduction to Indigenous Wellness for Today's Communities. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes ATTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, and the opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. The ATTC networks uses affirming language to promote the promises of recovery by advancing evidence-based and culturally informed practices. We have a few housekeeping items. If you have technical issues, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to help. Questions for our speaker should be put in the Q&A section of the toolbar. This will help us not lose them in the chat. They'll be important to us as we move forward. If captions or live transcript would be helpful, please locate that option using your toolbar near the bottom of your screen. You will be directed to a link for a short survey at the end of the presentation, and we'd really appreciate if you could fill it out. It takes just a few minutes. And certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to all who attended the full session. Connect with us on our social media or LinkedIn, or subscribe to get more information about future trainings. And now I'm going to introduce our presenter. I also want to let you know that Alfredo Lanza is with us, mostly as a participant, but if you have questions about future trainings that might focus on Indigenous belief and practice, please connect with Alfredo in the chat. And Cass is a proud member of the Seminole and Navajo tribes. She's drawing from inspiration from her ancestors and late sister to live a positive and impactful life. And now I'll turn things over to her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself in my native tongue. So, Yate Bene, Aisha Casandra Stouder, Yanishia, Ashiha Nishle, Auto Seminole, Bashashteen. I'm really happy to be here. I just said hello to anyone that may be from my same tribes. So on my mother's side, I'm from the Navajo tribe and Navajo Nation, representing the Salt Clan. And then on my father's side, he was full-blood Seminole from Okmulgee, Oklahoma. And so I'm really happy to be here. I'm really, really grateful to be here. I want to take a second to put my slides up. Okay. Give me a thumbs up, Rebecca, if you can see that.
I can see it. It looks good.
Okay, cool. Well, again, welcome. Today's presentation is about sacred knowledge, but it really has some in-depth look at specific biological parts of being an Indigenous person, both from the past and then in today's world. And so, before I go any further and with my introduction, I just wanted to open up in a good way first by acknowledging the territories that I'm offering this presentation on. I'm currently in what we know as central Arizona, Prescott Valley. So the landscape behind me is my home where I currently live. Lots of forests, lakes, different landscape of forested mountains and sandstone mountains. So I love my home. I just love my home. But originally, I'm from the Navajo Reservation near the Four Corners, and it is a small community named Tisto. And currently, I reside on the Yavapai, Apache, Hopi, and Dene territories, again, which is known as Central Arizona. So, if you would join me, I just want to open up in a good way. You can do with this time what you'd like, maybe a little meditation for yourself. But I'm just going to open up with prayer. Creator, hear my prayer. Allow this session to be protected and to be nurtured. Allow us to connect and open our ears and our minds and our hearts to the ideas of what it is to have sacred mind, sacred brain, body, and spirit. Creator, we know that we're designed specifically through you, and this course and this experience today maybe is a part of your design for us. And Creator, I'm just so grateful to share my voice, my experience, my knowledge, and I do it with respect. I do it in a good way. And I just want there to be respect here, carefulness, love, and good intention as we move forward through this presentation. Creator, the things that I leave out of this prayer, I know that you'll carefully construct and take care of. I have trust and I have faith in that. Amen. Thank you. So, yeah, welcome. My name is Casandra Stouder. I come from the Dene and Seminole Nations. When I was first born, my grandmother named me the one who joined them in a war. I didn't know what that meant when I was young, but coming through this work of prevention and wellness and public health work and social work has been 24 years of my experience throughout my life. And the collage of photos over here has just been from the time I was 18 up until present. I'm 41 years old. I have two adult children that are attending university, working on their masters in sports psychology and mechanical engineering. However, that wasn't my story. I come from a long line of really beautiful Indigenous people that have survived atrocities, beautiful things, joyful things, positive things, and some really heartbreaking things as well. So I commit to my life and my life's work to learn more about what it is to maintain our health, to improve health, and to connect with others and finding that commonality of harmony in a good way. And so what I share today, I hope it's helpful to somebody here. And so, yeah, I really enjoy working with youth and elders. I feel like they have a commonality. They both can be rambunctious and just very unruly at times. And I like a challenge because if you look at the picture on the left side of your screen, I'm the youngest of two older sisters, and my oldest sister, Cynthia, she's in a wheelchair there. She taught me the most. And, I really look at that wheelchair that she's sitting in, and it really depicts what my life has been in the health field, is just really being creative and looking at all the bolts and the metal and the materials on that, and how to include what society thinks is different or behind the mark or not normal. And so my young brain has formed around the knowledge that my sister has taught me. She lived 36 years blind, confined to a wheelchair, could not do the normal things that most people can do. And so, my middle sister and I remember growing up on the reservation, and we would just gather our cousins and other kids on the reservation, and we would put the wheelchair together so that we could, come together and help our sister into the wheelchair so we could go out and play. And so I'm grateful for her, and all of that to share and say that my oldest sister has been my master trainer, my ultimate professor in life, and has really brought me to join them in a war, which my grandmother named me at birth. Maybe she foresaw that, I would be utilized in a certain way to aid to those who are limited or so-called behind the mark. And that's really where I thrive. And this is why I'm here, part of why I'm here. So I'm just really thankful and grateful to be here. So let's jump into it. Honoring roots. Today's presentation really is about Indigenous wisdom with modern neuroscience. It's about powerful healing. Honoring our roots, the main thing to think about here is our ancestors understood brain science, before modern tools existed. And so, I began this presentation by acknowledging, our original stewards of this land. And I just want to invite you right now to consider whose territory you occupy, and, think about the traditional practices and the biology of those individuals, the soundness of that, and not just the culture, but, those human beings that were made up of millions of atoms, right? And billions of atoms, and the uniqueness around that. I think that, there's more to be said about the individuals. And so there's a part of this presentation that I'll be talking about is the medicine wheel, and it recognizes that trauma affects the whole person, and where Western society really kind of separates segments of wellness and wholeness. And so Indigenous culture really did a fantastic job, an amazing job of including all things, all living things together. And it was a beautiful way to live. And so I just wanted to bring acknowledgement and honoring for that. I just want to take a quiet moment here just to resonate with that. So we'll move on to a pathway overview. So our journey today really has 5 connected pathways that we'll focus on bringing balance to this presentation and a kind of good understanding. I'm really excited to share with you the thought process that I have on this. And, there's a few parts that I want you to focus on is one, there's a pre-colonial brain health that we'll focus on and really dive into. And then the medicine wheel as an actual brain framework and colonial traumas that have impacted our peoples, our Indigenous peoples. Also, traditional healing as neural medicine, how that works and how that looks and how that feels. Integrating wisdom today. I think a key part of that is storytelling with Indigenous people. It activates our empathy centers of the brain. Our ancestors knew narrative is medicine. Story was very emotional and very connecting to a lot of people. It wasn't just telling what happened, it was pulling at the heartstrings, right? It was creating that emotion and that deeper tie. And so that could also be an analogy for language, what that feels like. It's a certain language just evokes different emotions. And so all of these different things are really important and vital to our health. So pre-colonial Indigenous brain health, I really could go on and on about our natural law systems. It's really fascinating to me, and I think that I'm constantly learning and gravitated towards natural law, especially as an adult, as a parent, as somebody in the community where things can be overly structured and very sterilized and can make life feel very complicated. But being an Indigenous person and knowing some ancestral ties and knowledge, ancient knowledge, has really simplified my life in relying and backing myself on natural law. It simplifies everything. It's almost like, if you're in a confrontation, you don't combat with more confrontation. You do the contrasted thing, a very simple thing, and maybe apply love into that situation, and it changes everything instantly, and almost can add more time onto your life. It can, eliminate stresses and issues that may cause more harm to yourself. And so natural law of Indigenous people really is kind of a shortcut to living optimal health, in my opinion. So, yeah. Indigenous communities had sophisticated brain health systems. So if we think about like a well-tended garden, it's not just about one plant. It's about the plants together collectively supporting each other. And there's an original story of the corn, beans, and squash story. And there's a lot of analogy and understanding and teachings about life. Is that in that garden, the corn, grows really tall with the stalk and the leaves and the husk and all of that. It towers over the squash to provide that extra shade that it needs, but then the squash allows that extra nutrients so that it supports that corn. And then the beans, really relies on that squash to grow its vines and create that support as well. But they all need each other to continue that ecosystem. And that's just a very small fraction on how we think about these connections and how it makes sense in the body. So the four elements of this thinking is natural law, connection to all creation, balanced stress response, and ceremony activated rest and digest state in our well-being. It prevented chronic stress and damage to our internal system. Communal practice. We had circle gatherings, and it really helped us to synchronize our nervous systems. If you're ever just kind of take a pause in your living room with your family members or your friends, you can kind of feel that energy in the room and that simplicity. And so that was a ongoing practice for Indigenous people. The communal practices, our heart rates actually matched, and brain waves were able to align. It was almost like a symphony of that biological connection together. And it created co-regulation, community calmness, and it supported the practice of practicing being individually calm, meditation and prayer. Um, the third thing of our four elements is traditional foods. Wild fish was a constant food that we gathered, and it has omega-3s for the brain structure, berries, wild berries, antioxidants to protect our cells in our body, and lean meats, protein for the neurotransmitters in our brain that are firing all the time. And these were all brain medicines. It was a knowing, intentional knowing to feed our bodies to maintain the system and ecosystem of being. The fourth element is storytelling, and this built dense neural connections, because if you think about just learning a certain concept and pulling that text or that learning and then applying it to an essay, there's almost a gap between that. Unless with Indigenous people, there's storytelling, there's that connection, that communal bond. And when that emotion is felt and those other connections are processed together, there's an added experience in between that gap. And it becomes this deeper sense, this dense connection within your being. And it taught emotional regulation through pattern. It challenged our helpers, to really think about their capacity load, and it allowed us to pause even longer to seek resolution and solution. And it taught our brain to learn resilience and to take a beat. And I'm having a hard time right now because here's a prime example of being an Indigenous person while living in today's construct. Still trying, and this is me in real time trying to still reach back into my ancestral teachings and knowing, but also knowing my reality now as a colonized Indigenous person. So I do the best I can. So the bottom line is lower mental illness rates because intact systems supported optimal brain function. The medicine wheel as neurobiological framework. So the medicine wheel maps directly to the brain network. So it's almost like you can see here this picture of the four directions, and it's a compass. It's a four directions that must work in harmony. So each direction, the east represents so if you can look at the further, let's see, the upper right corner is the east. It represents the east, and that's the limbic system. And with more natural law elements, it also represents, in that direction, it represents the elements of fire, where the sun rises, spring. And we know that in the spring, a lot of our animals are having their babies. And in the springtime, there's a renewal, there's a blooming, there's a blossoming. And the element of fire is exactly what we feel when we're learning something or we're challenging ourselves as human beings. There's that fiery feeling before we come through that in a good way. And there's ultimately clarity on the other side of that, or beauty. Another representation of the East in that limbic system, and the amygdala regulation is like, I'll just speak from my experience as a mother, is birth. That was a very challenging, hard, painful experience for me. But ultimately on the other end, it was the birth of my children, and it was beautiful, and it's provided so much in my life. Um, the east in the brain region, it represents the amygdala. So this is like our alarm system in the brain, and practice. It represents practice, our talking circles, and the release of oxytocin. It creates safety and acknowledgement for whatever's coming up. And down in the lower right corner, we have the south direction, and this really represents the physical embodiment of somatic nervous system. So in the south, it with the natural elements, it represents the midday. So right at high noon, when the sun is right in the middle, it represents endurance and the earth foundation, summer, and in the brain region, it represents the somatic nervous system. It also represents the physical practice of dance, beadwork, integrating brain and body to release stored trauma. And I think about the east to the south is the east really represents birth and youth, and then in the south it represents our adulthood. And if you think about the sun traveling to noon, it's almost like a halfway journey throughout your life. So right now, as I'm an adult of two adult children, I'm right in that south region of my life. And so the medicine wheel also helps me navigate throughout a lifetime and even from moment to moment. So it's a really intense and beautiful way to help organize my life, to remain in harmony, and to be aware of what I may be lacking or what I may be focusing too much on. And so then we move on to the left bottom corner, and this represents the west. And so if we just kind of track a little bit more, so we went east, sun is coming up, south, sun is at high noon, and then in the west, the sun is starting to go down, just like my picture right here, right? It's right in the evening, and it also represents our elder years, you know, a life journey of collecting all that information and life experience and wisdom. And the things that I'm sharing with you today was handed down to me from many ancestors that have very long walks and experiences. And so I just really want to nurture and acknowledge that that beauty that comes from the West. It's the element of water. It's the evening. It's the fall season where all of our plants are now producing, and we can then gather and reap all of those benefits of the fruit, of the vegetables, of what nature can really grow and produce. And we know that as human beings, once we've graduated, once the kids have moved out, you know, it's like you're reaping some of the benefits. And the brain region is the prefrontal cortex right in the front of your brain. It's about planning, decision making. You're able to, you know, control your impulses. You're a little bit wiser. And the practice is council processes, strengthen our networks as Indigenous people. We rely on tribal council to maintain our tribal systems, and there's a maturity in that, and there's laws and structure that protect our traditional and tribal ways while also maintaining you know, and adhering the well-being and welfare of many people. So there's responsibility there. And this area in the West, I really like that it also represents the bear animal. And I think about a bear, it really does remind me of an elder, because if you ever sit in a space with an elder that has lived a long life, there's almost an intimidation to be around someone like that. And, you know, almost a fierceness in the knowledge that they carry. And we know that to be true about bears. You know, they hibernate, and when they're out gathering, they're very fierce. And, they also preserve a lot of their energy and fat stores and all of that. They just don't go out willy-nilly, right? It's like that understanding and knowing when to strike and when to use their powers in that way. And so, yeah, in the West direction, it's also responsibility and handing down that life is short, and in those elder years you're limited in time to hand down those teachings. So their prefrontal cortex is that executive functioning where you're planning to then give back to the next generation. So a lot of my elders and my family lines have handed down those teachings. And so then once I come into my elder years, it is then my responsibility and knowing to give back. And that's not just to give and share, but it's for the health and well-being and the survival of our family systems. And then we move on to the north, which is the upper left corner. The north is the spiritual phase of our medicine wheel, and it's kind of the network that embodies the air element and the spiritual element. It's about I think about north, and it's just like it sounds. North is up. And so when we pray and when we smudge, the smoke that comes off of the smudge for blessing ourselves really represents that air element. When you visually see the smoke going up, and when we pray, we believe that smudge is a tie to our prayers, taking it up beyond to those that have passed on in the spirit world. So there's two worlds that we rely on: is our natural law world, where we are right now, our physical world, and then our spiritual world. It is known that miracles happen, and so we can't fully explain them. We know that to be true. Think about 9/11, when the towers came down, and there were stories and miracles that emerged from that we really can't understand or fully explain, but they do happen, where survivors came out unscathed. And there's things, and so for Indigenous people, that's where that lives, in the north area of our balanced living. And so the practice represents ceremony. It creates coherence and connection to the ancestors. It keeps us connected, not separated. And the animal that is represented in the north is a white buffalo. The white buffalo holds a lot of sacred teachings around it for many, many tribes. And there's close to 600 tribes that are federally recognized across the U.S. nation, and some that are not recognized at all. And so for some tribes, the buffalo is a sacred thing, because and relational living element on our physical world, where there are stories pre-colonization, 500 plus years ago, where Indigenous people had very close ties to buffalo, and there was an understanding and almost a dialogue on the reciprocity of the buffalo needing to tend the ecological health of the land, and then also sustaining the life of the human beings. And there was a reciprocity of working together and understanding that system of being. And so the North also represents and acknowledges that part of our history. And then I'll move on to the center, is integration. It's really that framework. It's the center. And if you think about your body, it might be like your bones, right? Each part of the medicine wheel is really, really important. And the center, it meets all directions in harmony right there in the center. It represents balance, communication between all brain networks, or you could fill in the blank with brain networks, with anything, human networks, animal networks, natural elements networks. They're in the center. And Indigenous healing addressed the whole person and never isolated symptoms. And that same statement right there also braids into other areas of our lives. We see that view in many parts of our lives, that there's a whole view when applying ourselves to something. And since colonization up until now, Indigenous people are almost very conditioned to adapt and change and pivot. But it is a beautiful thing that we can maintain this holistic way of living and being. And even for me today, it's really healing to share this with each of you. So another way to kind of look at this is maybe if you're in your office space or your home right now, listening to this presentation, think about 4 rooms in a house. So the east is your living room where you can express your emotions, and the south is maybe your workout area in your home, and that represents the body. In the west is your study, where you can really think about things and process things. In the north is where you pray. It might be a chapel, and it creates that meaning in your life. And the center is the hallways that connect all of those rooms. And the main thing to take away from this slide and this part of the presentation is that you cannot live well in just one of those rooms for the rest of your life. So I want to take a moment here. We're just going to take 1 minute to think about which direction in your life feels really balanced, and maybe which direction in your life needs some attention. And just notice the awareness in that first step of acknowledging. So which direction feels balanced and which area needs attention? And just notice awareness is the first step. So we'll just take a moment. Very good. Okay, colonial trauma and the brain. Colonial trauma physically rewired Indigenous brains, measurable biology, not metaphor. So it's like a fire alarm that's been stuck on. The amygdala sees danger everywhere when the fire is gone. So that alarm is just bam, bam, bam. It's constantly going. So why discuss this right now? To understand healing mechanisms. So today's not just about, talking about Indigenous practices and then that's the way it is. It's very complex in the ways that it was and how it is now, and how it evolves over time. So it's not to assign blame. It's like doctors understanding injuries and how to treat them. How colonization rewires the brain. So colonization really has an impact on our brain system, and trauma during development. So boarding schools during critical brain development windows. I'll just share personally here. My mother is the middle of 6 brothers. Poor thing. She and her 4 brothers were survivors of boarding school, as were her parents, and my great grandparents were a part of the long walk for our Navajo tribe. And a lot of those separations and movements for many of my relatives had happened in those formative years. And so it really impacted my direct family line. Brains are designed for attachment and adapting slowly to threat. And so during those formative years of my family, it's almost like a dimmer light in your home. You can easily adjust it down and adjust it up. And so for many of the family members in my life, when those genocides had happened, it's almost like just the floodlights were on, and there's a huge gap in trying to adapt to those things. And so literally rewired our neural pathways and how we function to this day. Epigenetic transmission. So trauma travels through generations. It changes our gene expression. So our gene expression in our body, whatever is practiced or whatever is experienced as normal day to day, those things get passed down. And so if a lot of separation or abrupt removal has been experienced, those same sensations or gene expressions are then passed down. And there are times where there are many young people in my family where, a certain experience in a family gathering happens and their reaction is sometimes very exaggerated or alarming. And so it could be thought that it could be from some of our ancestral experience in the past, or it could not be. So it's the effects of our descendants and their stress responses. 7 generations, as elders taught us, we come from 7 generations back, and ultimately in that west direction, our life responsibility is to then think about the 7 generations that we leave behind, because when I sit down to pray and to meditate, I am speaking to and connecting with and maintaining that relationship to my ancestors who are no longer here. And if I know that right now, you and I in this presentation, if our lives are this meaningful right now, and we have so many complex, deep, beautiful areas of our lives that we've experienced, I can't deny that or separate that from what my ancestors experienced, because I know that there's a present knowing of the decency of being a human being and this long journey and all the layers to it. So when I pray and when I connect, I really am maintaining that relationship to each one of my ancestors and the things that they have experienced, and the knowledge in there too. And that's not to put stress or pressure on anyone. It's just a practice that I do. And so an analogy to kind of think about this, and this is a form of storytelling, it's the way that my brain learns the best as well. So think about forest trails. Our ancestors walked survival and fear paths, and the trails got worn down pretty deep. So 7 generations later, we still walk on those paths, and not from weakness. The trails are just well worn down. And the healing part of being an Indigenous person today is creating new trails. And so where I come from many generations back, there is probably no way that some of my ancestors would say, yeah, go do that presentation. They would probably be well against it, just from the depths of the pain and the experience that they have. However, I'm here in today's world, many generations forward. I'm the actual descendant of those ancestors trying to create harmony and understanding. And so it's a new trail and it's not necessarily easy, but I understand that there's wisdom in creating that new way. And so number three, three specific brain impacts. So over time, colonialism has created a hyperactive amygdala, so that alarm system going off. It equals the threat perception is everywhere, even in safety. Like I explained, some of the young people in our family gatherings, reacting in very exaggerated ways sometimes. Disrupted prefrontal cortex, which is where we make our decisions. And it really affects our impulse control. Reduce hippocampus, so our memory systems damage, exactly boarding school's intent. So I think about the hippocampus, and it lives right here above the ear, and it kind of looks like a little walnut. And to me, it kind of is a lazy part of our brain because it just takes snapshots of memory. And it's almost like when you're out in public and you see somebody familiar and you're just like dead set that you went to school with this person because you have this memory, but then you get closer to that person and it's completely like distorted. And so when we experience trauma as Indigenous people, that snapshot of those memories remains very true to us as a memory. And so it takes time to heal those parts of our memory and to bring into reality what is true and what we can take what am I trying to think of? What we can take our power back on, and just identifying who we are today, that we are not in boarding school today in this moment. Holistic practices, meditation, prayer, and ceremony are really key into that. And we'll get into that coming up soon. So let's just take a moment again to pause. And I just want to allow there to be time to absorb. And so I'll just finish here with this slide. It's not a character flaw or moral failing when we are trying to adapt to a new world and new way of being while still having these genetic expressions within our being as well. It's predictable adaptations to historical trauma, and knowledge contextualizes and points towards healing. It really allows that in-between bridge for us to carefully take a step onto and begin to learn more and more about that process of being and creating that new truth in reality. So I just wanted to let you know we have about one more slide and then we'll take a break in case you need to answer any phone calls or anything like that. But let's go through one more slide. So the window of tolerance, colonial trauma narrowed the regulation zone of traditional practices, actually widened that window of tolerance. So there's some areas that we're going to focus on And the best way I can describe this is like a river. The hyper arousal equals flood. It's too fast. It's like very fast destruction. And the window of tolerance is when that river is just flowing, just right. Hypoarousal equals that dried up, stagnant, just desert-like life, and it's very lifeless. Traditional practices equals channels and dams, keeping that network and that process just right. So there are 3 states. Let's go through these. Hyperarousal is above that window. It is where the fight and flight live. Anxiety, irritability, anger, hypervigilance. It's where the stress hormones damage brain tissue. Many Indigenous people live here chronically, even today. The window of tolerance, inside right in the middle, you see the green brain. On the picture, it is calm, engaged, clear thinking, where learning, healing, and growth happens. And then the, what color is this? I'm not sure what, I can't see the color, but the brain on the right is hypoarousal. And this is where freeze happen, collapse, numbness, disconnection, depression, shutdown, sometimes substance use as self-medication, how traditional practices widen the window is really where I wanted to share on this slide. And some of the ways that we widen that window is through drumming. Synchronize heart rhythms at 4 to 5 beats per second. It stimulates the alpha brain waves, which equals relaxation and integration at a very kind of natural river, like that natural flow. And singing, or ceremonial singing together, it activates the vagus nerve, which then taps into that green part of our brain and creates that calmness. It really calms that fight and flight, that hyper arousal phase, and it creates a vibration itself, which is almost like an internal massage within the body. And then movement and dance, our powwows and our ceremonial dances, it discharges activated energy. It's almost like if you look at a deer and or an antelope, and they just, escaped a very hungry lion, and the lion decides to go check on its cubs. And so when that lion is free and clear, the antelope will literally shake its body to shake that energy off and to continue with its day. However, in today's world, if you could think of Indigenous folks as that antelope, in today's world, everything is kind of fast moving. It's very bing, bam, boom, on to the next. And so a lot of the times when we experience that same threat feeling in today's world, we don't necessarily have a lot of time to go to ceremony, to go dance, to go and practice our ways of healing, to shake off that energy. And so that's really key to understand as well in today's world. Ceremony, it gets us back into our body, and it's predictable structure that equals safety. Its communal nature equals that co-regulation again through mirror neurons. It's that multisensory equals multiple brain networks engaged at the same time. And it creates that natural integration. And so just hearing that right there, that just that natural flowing, natural integration, it feels good even for me to say that So to practice it and to live it, it just makes me think of optimal life health. So the bottom line is these literally rewire our neural pathways over time, and cultural revitalization is brain medicine. It is literal medicine that helps us get out of these opposite, very extreme areas of our being. And so this is the end of this slide. I just wanted to offer a break. So let's take a 5-minute break. If you'd like to grab a snack or water, answer that phone call or email, feel free to do so. Thank you. I love that music. Thank you for sharing. Let's see. I think I need to share again. Let's see.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
And we have, just so you know, there is one question in the Q&A.
Okay, let's go for it.
Okay. So Danielle writes, can individuals move between the phases in the medicine wheel back and forth, or are they set phases where one stays in?
No, definitely. It's about balance, right? So, it depends on your individual needs at that moment. Yes, you can go back and forth, you can go backwards. It's just orientation and a certain way to kind of follow. It's not a set way, but depending on where you're at in your life, it's just helpful to navigate. But no, you can go backwards. You can spend time in one area and then jump over to another area if you need to. Thank you for that question. Okay. Hopefully you had a nice break. I had my favorite fig bar is Nature's Bakery fig bar. I don't know. These things are addicting. So I'm definitely feeling fulfilled. Okay, let's move on. There's our break. Traditional practices as neurobiological healing. These weren't just metaphors, right? These were like really sophisticated ways of healing. So ceremony, again, it tapped into our vagal tone regulation as that calming part. And language was that architectural restoration. It's almost like this whole section is about our brain's original instructions. Ceremony was like the reset button, and language was our operating system, and stories were like the software update. They were like the reboot. And the kinship, the family members, that network was all about the connections. And then our land was the ultimate power source. So the healing technologies were ceremony, language, stories, kinship, and land connection. Ceremony included rhythmic drumming, synchronized the hearts, our heart rates, activated the parasympathetic nervous system. Why ceremony feels energized yet peaceful at the same time. That's the actual experience within the body. It regulates the vagus nerve's ability to calm stress in the moment. And the language is tribal languages activate different pathways than English does. English to an Indigenous person can feel very much so like many gaps. And Indigenous language is very descriptive and illustrative with stories. It ties a lot of emotion, again, to the language. And reclaiming native languages rebuilds neural connections to ancestral memories. It literally allows us to almost experience their world at the same time. Language revitalization is brain architecture restoration. And our stories provide narrative coherence to traumatized brains. And it helps to restore and bring them back to health. Structure, the template for processing trauma. And stories rewrite brain's trauma narrative. So our kinship is basically our clan structures, just like I introduced myself in the beginning here. I don't know if I'm going to have a relative that's participating in this session. And so it's just a way for me to maintain that tie, that ancestral tie, and that current living day tie as an Indigenous person to acknowledge my kinship, my clan. And it also rewires shame. Instead of shame, the opposite is connection and connecting and going up against that colonial narrative of my existence. It's the brain's social engagement system. It relaxes into safety with our kinship systems, and it extended family repair from boarding school and attachment damage. When we practice our kinship practices, it really helps to heal those areas. Our land connection, it gives us our full sensory engagement. So our smell, sound, sensation, visual patterns, and where many of our stories are birthed from. It integrates brain networks fragmented by trauma. It helps to bring all of that together. And our nervous system recognizes patterns. It evolved with over thousands of years. And so these aren't metaphors. They are measurable neurobiological realities explaining why cultural revitalization produces measurable mental health improvements. So brain health through the medicine wheel. Specific practices for each direction address different brain networks. So the East is our emotional. So this is practiced through talking circles. And in the South is our physical. This could be practiced through beadwork and basketry, weaving, other body practices. I personally was gifted and taught ceremonial ways of body healing and deep tissue massage, in a sense. So unwiring many heaviness within the body, and I thoroughly enjoy that. That's something that I practice continually in my communities. In the West is mental. So it's observing nature. It's that cognitive flexibility. Being in nature is a really good way to tap into the mental, because nature is always evolving and changing. Even right now, it's constantly changing, and so it taps into that area of our brain. For intergenerational teaching and perspective taking on that wisdom, it's not static; it's constantly evolving and changing. In the North is spiritual. So it's the present moment awareness and silence focused observation, traditional mindfulness. It was practiced long before scientific, science named it whatever it named it today. And then the center is integration. So present moment awareness, silence, focused observation. I always like that saying, hurry up and, what is it? Hurry up and stop. It's, when you pause and reflect and pray, things happen more smoothly after and almost faster. And a prime way of thinking about that is within our pre-colonial times, before war would break out, our warriors would stop, pause, and pray and meditate for long periods of time before they went to battle. And it was a very smart technique because it preserved energy and fat stores and energy stores within the body before they went out and exerted all of that energy to maintain safety for the well-being and the livelihood of the village or of the tribe. And so in today's world, that looks like, again, today's hustle and bustle, on to the next, and take. There is no restorative, sometimes no restorative or that regain of energy, or is that stop and pause. And so we operate a lot better when we take those moments. And so the medicine wheel addresses all neural networks, not isolated regions. It's a comprehensive brain health. And so community-centered brain health, it's kind of like an orchestra of instruments. One plays the violin, the others tune in to match that violin, and the whole orchestra together in harmony, almost makes it impossible to hear just one instrument. And we are designed to play together, not solo. And we know that together as a human race, right? For example, and I hate to repeat, make an example of the pandemic, but look what emerged from that is, so much compassion and helpfulness and togetherness from people, and many beautiful things emerge from such a tragedy. But we work better together, and we know that as people. Let's see here. Okay, so family-centered healing, families healing together is really important in today's world of being an Indigenous person, practicing these very holistic ways of living in the presence of youth, in the presence of our elders is really key. And intergenerational elders, adults, youth, and children together, it creates this interaction pattern and this new system that is, again, going back to that gene expression. It's creating that new path, that new trail that can then be passed down to the next generation. And so it's really important. It literally changes those gene expressions over time. Land-based healing is restoring our sensory integration. Just acknowledging nature, nature is slow sometimes and unpredictable at times. And so it teaches us a very realistic worldview. In today's world, it also allows us to pause and reconnect with those very decent, humane ways of living, not rushing to the next and taking control of or capitalizing on these very Western kind of views of living. And ceremony, it synchronizes brain activity across groups. So it's almost saving our lives, and connection to self and community is something greater than ourselves, and more important, I think, to stress and reiterate and verbalize out loud. We heal best in relationship webs because our brain develops and functions in relationship. Isolation equals neurobiologically harming. Connection equals neurobiologically healing. And we'll get into that a little bit more, the contrast between healing versus harm. So historical trauma echoes through generations. Healing must address individual and collective. For example, Indigenous ACEs, beyond the standard ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, it does not include colonial specific ACEs and the neurological impacts, the epigenetic transmission of trauma response, cultural continuity as protective factor, healing-centered engagement versus trauma-informed care. So Indigenous ACEs beyond standard ACEs should include boarding schools, displacement, removal of language, culture, dress, removal from our homes, criminalized culture, stigmas, and stereotypes, environmental destruction. So there's quite a long list that could be added into this Western framework. And I work for an ACEs organization and am actually a ACEs trainer. I do trainings on trauma for many groups, and really incorporating this Indigenous view is important and key as well. Created distinct neurobiological impacts. Again, my family were survivors of many of those things, and so was I. my mother has a story of when um, when government officials had come to my grandmother's home and literally told my grandmother to pick two of her youngest children, and the rest had to go to boarding school. My mother was a part of the few that were removed from the home. And on the ride to the Catholic boarding school, my mother's hair is much longer than mine. Mine's about past my waist. My mother's hair was cut in the vehicle up to her ears, and she could only respond in her native tongue. And when she responded and cried in that confusion, she was then hit in the mouth. And from that, it just catapulted her into numerous occasions of abuse. And so that also lives in my body, in my children's body as well. And so it is not to bring down the vibe of this presentation. It's just to share a truth and an actual experience of what's to be included in this entire presentation is the realities of that and why this is so important to gather on these types of engagements to educate and learn and share these experiences. But research does confirm elders' understanding. Trauma responses transmit across generations. Stress hormones alter and gene expressions alter as well. It affects descendants, whoever experience original trauma. Why historical events impact Indigenous children's brains today. So again, that forest trail worn deep over 7 generations, but healing creates that new trail. So me literally just sharing that kind of hard experience of my mother is just acknowledging it and understanding in my brain right now that that is no longer true, but it is something that my family has been resilient against and coming through. So cultural elements provide exact regulation, counteracting the trauma. So my prayer opening up in this presentation is creating that balance for me. And there is a shift of old versus new in these thought processes. The old thinking is like, what's wrong with you? And harm reduction is like just looking at the symptoms. She's really sad, or she's has these outbursts and rage. It's just singling these different symptoms out and trying to treat them. Whereas now the new way of looking at some of these issues as Indigenous people is to ask the question, what is right? What is going good for you right now? And what brings you that wholeness and thriving well-being in your life. It activates these reward systems and pathways in our brain. And it's almost like helpers along that new trail with a brand new shovel. They're just helping you out with that, creating that new path. And so it's more focused on strength-based, and it activates more of that neuroplasticity within our brain, creates a better future for us as Indigenous people and our healing. So trauma-informed equals studying the cracks in the broken pot, and healing-centered. Today, our focus and my focus within my community is healing-centered, remembering that the pot was created to hold water and nourish life, not focusing so much on the cracks, not dismissing them and denying them, but just understanding the purpose and the foundation of that pot. And so we're shifting from brokenness now to purpose while acknowledging. So the bottom line is cultural revitalization restores brain neural regulation systems specifically targeted by colonial practices. policies. Okay, substance abuse. Oops. Substance. After. Okay. Substance use is adaptive response to overwhelmed nervous systems. It's not a moral failing. And I just want to touch on this because it is a stigma within our populations. It's like duct tape on a broken pipe. When those stereotypes are shared amongst Indigenous people, it's just leaving it at the surface level. And so I want to get into this. So it stops the immediate leak of overwhelming feelings, the use of substance, but it doesn't fix the pipe nervous system. My husband's a water operator engineer, so he would I'm just going to hide this from him. Traditional healing replaces the whole pipe and it addresses why it is broke. So it looks at the elevation, the environment, the materials around that pipe, the tools that were used around it and the machines that were used around it. It's identifying everything to make a complete and successful project. So how colonial trauma created vulnerability. It created hypervigilant amygdala. Again, that alarm collaborated to see danger everywhere. Belonging itself became dangerous for people. Just to integrate and try to belong and align, it created a lot of those alarm systems. For example, my mom getting into a vehicle with government types of people probably would still trigger her today, and those alarms would sound. Constant alert, it became unbearable tension, seeking relief when all of these alarms are going off all the time in a normal day-to-day situation. It becomes exhausting. Dysregulated vagal system. Reset and digest system is dysregulated. Protective shutdown now triggers numbing behaviors. Substance use as a self-medication. So it makes it challenging, but almost impossible for some Indigenous people to just focus and live day-to-day life if those alarm systems are going off. And again, there's almost no pause period in between when those things are happening for an individual and when we would know ceremony and tradition and our Indigenous ways of living to come and cope with those things to create more of that integration of healing and balance, rebalancing. We no longer live in those systems anymore. And so we then just kind of compound and layer on top of that high alert system, just embedding more and more of that dysregulated functioning. And so, yes, a lot of our Indigenous people have experience depression and anxiety and these mental health issues, and which then filter and affect our physical well-being. We have high rates of diabetes, and the maternal mortality rates are the highest in the US, and I could go on and on and on. However, they do stem from this disconnection and not being able to be reconnected, reharmonized with our ways of living and being. And so, I think about even my own personal story. I'm somebody who's now sober, but I did live that very dysregulated life for a very long time, and it was very exhausting. And culture was the main path that got me onto this track of healing. It literally was me on my knees on the earth, on the ground, praying to my ancestors to please help me. And then it just took off. And when it took off, it built such a strength and a revitalization within my body that when I had the rest and capacity to, I'm now focused on sharing and teaching and being part of the growing and the healing. which is another reason why I'm here. So this is also helping my health. So thank you. Um, but yeah, and there is a biochemical response within that dysregulation, and it's called, what's it called? Neuroadrenaline. And it's like a cocktail within our body. It shoots out this cocktail every time we get that triggering response. And for example, if you've ever gotten in a heated argument, which we've all had that, you might feel a response within your physical body where your cheeks are flushed or your breathing becomes accelerated, your heart rate becomes accelerated, and it takes some time to come down from that and rebalance your system after that. So you might have to step away from that argument and then confide in a friend or somebody to kind of explain what that was about, and your nervous system is just naturally starting to regulate. But if you don't have that space and time of those practices in between to co-regulate or to regulate individually, it compounds and it creates even more damage. Your heart rate stays elevated for a really long time, putting more stress on other systems within your body. And so that calming down and coming down, co-regulating and regulating your system is really, really important. And there are times where this biochemical that shoots throughout your system during that time, that neuroadrenaline, sometimes it takes 30 minutes, sometimes it takes 2 days to completely dilute and run its course through your body. And so if we think about our youth that are going to school, they've just been hit or they've just been in an argument, abusive argument within their home, and their parents come from generations of disconnect and trauma and those harms that the cycle continues with the adults in their household. And then that child goes to school and the teacher says, hey, guess what? Pop quiz. And their system is still regulated with that neuroadrenaline. It is very hard to focus and it is very hard to do the, as I said, the regular day-to-day systems. And so providing spaces in schools is and for youth is something I focus on as well, is just to bring that ceremony and bring that tradition and way of re-regulating our people is a decent way to do my work, I believe. So that's just one example. It's not just a norm that we're using substances or going that way. It's not a moral failing. It many times is only what is available within our communities. We have food deserts, we have grocery deserts, but almost on every reservation is a liquor store or casino. And so our environment and ecological boundaries no longer offer what was resourceful and healthy before colonization. So all of that to say, yeah, the answer is to create time and experience and connection with sitting on the ground, with not necessarily controlling and fixing the issue, but just to be with in relationship with that individual and to validate their experience, no matter how it comes out, how it's expressed, and to offer prayer, to offer a safe place for that individual to land where maybe their unregulated system can then rest and come back. Because again, we know when we pause and reflect and take time that natural energy stores are restored and we're able to live maximally. Okay, one more slide and then we'll take a break for questions. Unless you all need another physical break, we can do that, but I'll try to get through these quickly. So, Indigenous communities maintained brain health practices before neuroscience existed. It's almost like medicine bundles. Each item has power. Real medicine equals how they work together. More powerful than any single piece. I love sweetgrass. Sweetgrass really brings that harmony and is a very light medicine that I use in my teas, in my smudge, in my prayers, and just holding. Um, and sage is used quite a bit with many tribes. Sage is a little bit heavier smoke and a heavier smudge when used. And to me, it's a heavier medicine because it is used to carry almost the heavier parts of our lives. So if there's illness, sickness, death, those heavier experiences in our lives as human beings, that is a medicine that we rely on to kind of help carry the weight of. And cedar is another example. Cedar is kind of a very tart and sour kind of taste and smell, and that is used for injuries or illnesses and things that need almost like you would take a very bitter cough syrup or something if you have strep throat. It's different than a cold, but it's a little bit stronger, needed for that tissue repair on the throat or that cut or break in the bone. We would use that. And anything that would kind of illustrate that same thing is a very acute trauma or separation or injury in our lives. It could be a very quick separation in a relationship. It could be a very instant shift in our life. We would use the cedar because it's almost that quick, bitter, just instantly feel it kind of thing. And it mimics what we need in that moment to help repair. I hope that makes sense. So our 5 practices. Elder wisdom transmission is really, really important. It activates multiple brain regions simultaneously. It mirrors neurons plus language centers plus prefrontal cortex. It creates dense neural networks supporting resilience. And traditional stress management, deep breathing, mindfulness, ceremonial prayer directly regulates the HPA axis, so our brain's stress system. It reduces cortisol, damaging the brain tissue. Ancestors knew how to turn off stress response. Narrative coherence, story and ceremony help make meaning. It activates the medial prefrontal cortex. It contextualizes and integrates difficult experiences, not fragmented traumatic memories. Cultural CBT. Traditional practices naturally connect thoughts, emotions, behaviors within cultural frameworks, equals accessible, meaningful experiences, and it rewires negative patterns while strengthening cultural identity. Our traditional foods, again, the omega-3s with the wild fish and antioxidants with the berries and protein with wild game, produces optimal brain nutrition, and processed foods cannot provide this at the same level. So the bottom line is our ancestors intuitively understood brain function, what it needed to sustain itself, and the energy it needed to produce and live in these bodies. It developed practices supporting optimal neurological health long before Western science confirmed these relationships. So I'm just going to take a pause here. If there's any questions, or just let me know if y'all would rather take a physical break. We can take a break. Otherwise, we'll answer some questions and then move on.
There is one question in
Okay.
the Q&A. It says, can you expand on the land connection equals sensory integration, please?
Yeah, land sensory. So if you think about the land underneath is different layers, right? And then if there's our ecosystem of plants and trees and all of that, then there are roots. And there's different types of roots and the ways that they and the patterns that they grow and reach towards. And then, if there's a water source, they're going to be a little bit more um, stronger in terms of reaching towards that water for sustainability. And so if we think about the land and what land looks like today as well, it really does mimic and illustrate what the human body looks like and works like. So for example, all of our skin is the surface of the earth and the land, and underneath, you can think about our vessels and our small veins, large veins, our connective tissues and ligaments and all of that really would illustrate the vital roots of our plants in our natural world and living. And underneath that, our vital organs would be the water source, the mountain source, the mineral source on the land. And so having that connection and understanding that the land is not separate from us as Indigenous people. We are the land. We are in relationship with the land and we actually operate in that same way. Um, and it is very true, that same balance and harmony is needed for optimal health as well. For today, I'm really focusing more on that mental and that brain health aspect of it, but there's literally thousands of other focused areas that I can go into in terms of Indigenous ways of healing, practicing, and viewing, and kind of balancing what was and what is. Does that answer your question? I hope.
We've got some more questions that have come in.
Yes.
All right, let's me start at the top. Um, when adding ceremony for healing, do you have people who object based on religious beliefs? And if so, how do you support them move beyond their objections?
Yeah, that's a constant in my life as an Indigenous person. And, it comes from an individual stance, right? And I've done lots of work on myself, lots and lots, and I will continue to do lots of work on myself. However, it's an individual stance of, you know, I'm not trying to change the world or each individual. I'm trying to convert everybody into my worldview. And so that's a personal stance on it. I do understand that there are specific, unique situations where religion does clash with spirituality in a lot of these spaces. And I think just providing respect and space and validation for those views to exist, as well as your own, it is a good way to start, not necessarily needing to control or merge those two together. Again, my brain is wired to find that common ground, and where can we start from here? If it is just asking questions as a starting point rather than you need to come over here, or you need to understand this. It's just having that first step of common curiosity, inquisitive curiosity.
Oh, thank you. Let's look at the next one. Let's see. Margaret says, I appreciate your breadth of knowledge. How did you learn about the connection of cultural practices and neurobiology?
Yeah, and again, my sister, right? That's how my brain was wired. I grew up in challenge. I grew up very poor and lots of adversities, and not just in my lifeline, but again, from generations back, it was very difficult growing up as an Indigenous person and can be difficult to this day. However, I have more understanding in it. And what brought me to those areas of learning and pushing, and still today, I'm constantly applying for new courses and engaging in today's world of health and well-being, and then also understanding and fitting into this world how it was for my ancestors and myself. And the more I can find that equal ground of understanding between two, I do my best to protect that and nurture that, and then share it when I'm able to or when it feels right. And for this opportunity today and sharing this presentation, it's taken some time to get to this point, and the relationships built behind this presentation and building up and planning too has all aligned with this vision and uh, neurobiological understandings and education trainings, all of that. I feel like it's a never-ending puzzle for health and bringing back what was nurtured and taken care of from my ancestors into a reality of today is like my constant curiosity and like ultimate motivator. So it's not just a neuro understanding, it's other parts of health and well-being. And I had that background through wellness and fitness and nutrition as a young lady. That's where it started. It literally started with running ceremony. And then from there, I wanted to know about more about fitness, and from my substance use and addiction and all of that, it made me curious about the brain. It made me curious about the body and the organs, and so on and on.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we've got another one. What advice do you have for the people who want to learn their own community's practices and attend their community's communal events, but don't have a direct connection to an elder who still practices these to ask? For example, I might know where Stomp is held, but I don't feel right just showing up without knowing my role and the practices and without an invite.
Yeah, definitely. And again, a lot of our ways of knowing and living is relationship based. Everything is relationship based, whether it's relationship with the literal dirt, relationship with the animals and the plants, and that goes for people as well. So that is a knowing that Indigenous people have, and to have another individual human being that's interested in that as well, that just wants to start at that relationship level is really a great place to start. And I would say that for anything, is just to understand it. We don't just free willy, just jump into whatever situation in our lives just because, it's interesting. We sometimes have to apply ourselves, and we feel better about ourselves as human beings when we do that. When we, why is this important to me? Whatever it is. And, what can human beings are naturally giving and helpful and loving and kind, I believe. And so when we look at every aspect of our life in that way, even if it includes a stomp ceremony, is why is this important to me? And how can I be helpful to this? And how am I going to learn from this? And once I learn those gifts, how am I going to take care of those gifts? And what can I do to protect and maintain this or keep it in a good way? And then build relationship on that to it. I think that's true for many things in our lives, but starting there with relationship, my name is, very like how I started. Hello, my name is Casandra. I come from these tribes, and this is my experience. And starting from there, what a world we would live in if we all started that way, right?
We've got two more questions. Are you feeling okay to go on?
We can, yeah, let's finish up the two and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. I would love to learn more about the integration of these sacred practices in modern health practices and policy. Do you have any educational resources or organizations you recommend to expand our knowledge and respect to these practices?
Oh, definitely. There is the tribal governance program, TGP organization. Look them up. Tribal governance program, .org, .com. You'll find information on there. That is a plethora of detailed information on laws, policies, evolving laws and policies and relationships, government to government relationships as well, in today's world of support, advocacy, and more understanding with that part of it. But that is a wonderful organization. They host trainings constantly and certifications. They have a lot of resources on their website as well. And the logo, just what you're looking for, is like an orange circle, like a tribal pattern with bright orange on it. Orange and white is what you would look for. I hope
You want to
that's
give me,
helpful.
yeah, give me that try. I'll try to find it while people are still talking, but the the acronym again.
Yeah, TGP, Tribal Governance Program.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Um, let's see. How do you approach conversations with non-native people who question the reliability of our practices and who demand data to prove impact?
Yeah, it's how can I put this? There's like two structures. Um, there's a indigenous natural worldview, and then there's a westernized view. On an indigenous view is each component of our living and making decisions and understanding and learning parts of our ways of living are founded on and grounded on relationship. And what we know in that reciprocity of being in relationship to all living things in our universe has been severed. And one of the learnings that we understood from the beginning of genocides and removal from our lands is a separate, physically being separated from the land in our home. This has to do with data and that understanding with the question, because um, it the intent was to 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 take the resource for the sustainability and the livelihood of their own families. However, it happened unnaturally and too fast and too quick, and it created a lot of harm and a lot of death in a sense of what was already in harmony. And so when it fast forward, when it comes to data and collecting for indigenous populations, it's already ingrained in our bodies, in our system, and even our relationship with our lands, that there is a constant taking, which has evolved into numerous issues with our populations on multiple levels. And data collection can be, for many groups of indigenous people, very harmful and does not acknowledge the root of where the response comes from. The response usually is non-compliant with data collectors from indigenous people. Indigenous people can be very non-compliant, shut off, non-cooperative. It's not because we have bad attitudes or we're just mean people, or, on that surface level. Again, let's dig into it a little bit deeper. There's been a constant, repeative, perpetual taking of land, bodies, family relationships, food source, language, celebrations, joy over time, and has not been acknowledged fully yet. And little increments of those same practices, when requested in a very busy day-to-day, regular, normal operational workday happens, that same epigenetical and gene expression may show up as no from an individual Indigenous person or a population of Indigenous people, because possibly it comes from that line of trauma, of those damaged ways of being. The solution or the antidote for that is in the East. In the East is where that fire lives, right? It's that fire burn. It is challenging to heal as a people and as groups. So let's eliminate our titles and our professions and all that. If the common goal is to have the data to improve, then that relationship needs to be built at that point, while acknowledging that you're willing to go and meet that fire of change, because that fire will affect you while going into the truths of what actually happened to Indigenous people. You're going to experience that. But you're not going to experience it alone if you build that humane relationship with the Indigenous person, where you can build that bond and then move forward in clarity in that good relationship along that medicine wheel trajectory, right? But there has to be that moment of coming together, of balance, and it is hard. It's challenging, but it's not impossible. It's that vulnerability of stepping forward towards that fire for that change. So yeah, we're really getting into it.
All right. And then there's a few other comments, but it looks like this is the last question. I appreciate your wisdom. I'm curious about your experience navigating the healthcare system in regard to your sobriety. Whether your recovery took place inside or outside of typical healthcare settings, what was it like to use your traditions and culture to heal when our society primarily uses shame to promote abstinence as the only path to recovery for those who use substances?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for all the questions. Thank each and every one of you. Yeah, with my own recovery, it incorporated a lot of different methods. One was just white knuckling it, trying to do it on my own. Another way was looking online, just looking at different websites and things to kind of educate myself. And so a lot of reading on my own. And then I was always in the wellness arena. And so a lot of my friends or people that participated in my programs, where there were some that were in recovery, and then that piqued my interest, but they were going to programs like AA, and they would verbalize some of the statements and the teachings and I forget the name of it, but they would share their experience of recovering and the tools and the practices of those ways of being. And that always intrigued me because it was so brutally honest. And I was really, really attracted to that for some reason. So I think just my spirit was always attracted to that. And, in my specific personal story is I've dealt with relapse, and alcohol was forced on me at age 4. And every 4 years throughout my life, I would relapse or go to the extremes with the substance that I was on. And I didn't understand it until I came up onto another stint of 4 years of sobriety, and I felt that I was going to relapse again until I went to a meeting, and it was a regular AA meeting, and it was a mixed group of people, and I just listened, and a lot of it reminded me of ceremony, actually. Um, and come to find out, the basis of AA was was learned from Indigenous practices, um, of sitting in a circle and kind of bearing your heart and your truths, and with the privacy of that group, and not allowing those shares or things to go beyond that, to hold the medicine in that moment. And it brought back all of those ancestral knowings, and experience that I had. And so then I moved on to more Indigenous talking circles and wellbriety and other healing circles with sobriety. And then it just clicked. And this is the first time in my life with sobriety and therapy. I had been going to therapy for 26 years. Actually, I just completed my Indigenous woman therapist, who has her PhD and all of that, and also has ceremonial teachings as well. She gave me the boot. She said, "You're good. You're good to go, but please feel free to come back if anything comes up." So that's a huge accomplishment for me to intermix a lot of that. But I think that's been my experience with a lot of things. It's just balancing where all of me fits. And I live in today's world, and my children live in today's world with me, where, we live in a very high tech world. And I'm not denying that. And it is awesome. And also, my ancestors were pretty dang awesome too. So I'm trying to bring that together, not just for my sobriety and my well-being, but others. Thank you.
Well, there are so many lovely comments about appreciation for what you've shared and how open and honest you've been with everyone. Um, the last kind of request is that if you have any suggested readings, people would appreciate hearing about that. So,
Yeah,
yeah, if
yeah.
you could share any of that. I know we're
Okay.
getting close to the end of our time together.
Yeah, of course. And I didn't even get through half, but that's fine. That's usually how it goes. Yeah, I think My Grandmother's Hands, please read that book. My Grandmother's Hands. I know I have the author here. My Grandmother's Hands is a wonderful book. It is by Kimmer, or so Kimmerer. My Grandmother's Hands. No, I'm sorry. Menakim. Menakim, My Grandmother's Hands. And then, of course, The Body Keeps the Score. That's a really good one. Indigenous Healing by Ross. Braiding Sweetgrass was the Kimmerer, Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass. And just recently, I finished two novels from um, Orange. The heck is his name?
Somebody's saying Tommy?
Yes, Tommy Orange. Heck yeah. Those were some good books. And then also Blood Memory by Dayton Duncan and Ken Burns. That was a really good one. Oh man, so many books, and I'm such a nerd. I love to read. But yeah, I want to continue, and I know that we're right on time, unless you'd like me to close up now.
I'm okay if you want to stay for a little bit longer.
Okay.
And if folks do need to leave,
Yeah.
know that you can do that. And we are going to post a recording and the slides Cass had brought with her to our website. So
Okay.
I'm okay if you continue for a bit yet.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll just touch on a few other things and then wrap it up here shortly. So thank you again. Yeah. Trauma informed to healing centered. Um, Supporting children's brains development. Yeah, this is really important. So think about a young tree and back to that land-based learning and healing as the deep roots really secure our attachment to our culture, to our relatives and our surroundings. And the rich soil is that cultural connection. And the steady watering of that young tree is consistent care and protection from the storms and safety, creating, stability for that tree. And given these, trees grow strong enough to weather future storms. That's exactly what we're trying to do for future generations. And so that all happens through creating safety. So it reduces the chaos and traumatize children. It allows the brain to form at a slower, more natural pace. And traditional child rearing is a lot of connection. It's actually like a lot of skin to skin connection for a very long time. And that's not just to be super close and lovey dovey. It has a lot of health impacts on both, on the mothers and caregivers' oxytocin levels and their brain health. And then the child is starting to build and grow those very strong roots that will sustain them throughout their lifetime and building connected relationships, children around caring people, again, the oxytocin, and it allows them to calm their nervous system at a more natural pace. And they have more and more of that foundation, even when they're up against that crazy storm that will come. They've had those practices of calming and regulating through co-regulation. Cradle boarding is a practice. Cradle board has a foundation for the spine and the structural body of the baby, and it has a very soft threading and lacing that binds the baby so the baby feels supported and held and in constant connection, even when not in connection. Connection is a huge thing. And singing songs, lullaby incorporates language and storytelling. We're prepping our child to rely on those things to have deep connection rather than separateness or no connection, or stop and end. There's a constant singing or lullaby or rocking or connection. There's always like some form or thread of that happening with child rearing. Supporting concurrent or coherent narrative development. So our narratives in our brain and our day-to-day living are really important. So finding meaning in difficulty, not just disciplining or forcing or controlling the narrative of that difficult moment that we push through or we take control of or we beat it. In those difficult moments, we are building a new narrative of finding solitude and meaning and understanding in that, and understanding then steps into relationship again. Is a slower process. Narrative structures help developing brains organize experiences rather than having constant question. Fostering post-traumatic growth. That's really important. Indigenous child rearing cultivates these through graduated challenges and guided mastery. So it's a very slow process. And one way to kind of visualize that is our eagle feather we pray with usually a lot of the time. And that's another form and connection that we have with our teaching is the stem of that eagle feather is usually wrapped in leather or beaded or some kind of material on that bottom part of that stem. And that stem really represents infancy and birth. And we wrap our babies and we nurture them and stay very close to them. That's what that represents. And then the plume of the eagle feather, like the bushy white part, is next to that wrapping or that stem, and that represents chaos and difficulty on your life journey that is existent for everybody. But after that plume or that bushiness on the feather is then the very single hair on those on the eagle feather from the stem out is just a single line hair that goes one individually all the way up. And next time you hold a feather, take a look at it. And that represents refining after the chaos. Is there's a clarity and a knowing and a wisdom, and that calmness comes. But the stem represents the entire life journey of an individual, and that it is a slow process. And the feather starts out wide because we need a lot of process when we're young. And then the eagle feather starts to narrow at the top. And that represents our elder years. And when we pass, and that represents not needing so much process because you have that wisdom. But then the feather ends, which represents the end of life. But we have to give it back to the next generation. So integration with modern approaches. Let's see here. Yeah. I think rest and recovery is really essential. So this last point here, chronic stress, again, when we don't have time to pause or regulate, it literally can damage parts of our brain tissue, especially that hippocampus with the memory. It'll affect our worldview. This is really important. If we don't apply that rest and recovery, our worldview can change. So, an example, when I wasn't in recovery, I was still using and living a very chaotic life and dysregulated. Somebody who was healthy or had a pretty healthy lifestyle would say, Cass, you need to go to recovery, or you need this, or like take a break. My worldview and my trying to keep up with that chaos and that high level of dysregulation, my response was very quick, short, and like I heard that as a threat, because taking time to pause and connect threatened my life. My worldview taught me that I have to keep up in this very traumatic way in order to survive, because I didn't, and my ancestors didn't continue to practice that way of living. And so I knew that as my reality. If I do something outside of that, it could endanger my life. And so people that are homeless or in addiction, sometimes their response is, hey, F you, I'm not doing that. Like, screw that. And their worldview is very small, and it's very negative, and it's very shut down. You think about not having space or time to rest or feed yourself and do things like that. Of course, you're going to think horrible things because there's not enough time to nurture yourself and love yourself, or to receive that from your environment. And so that rest and recovery is really essential for our brain health and our healing as Indigenous people. So that we can build a better worldview. Now I'm saying I believe in love and connection, and that we can heal as a whole people, as a human race. And that was not my view when I was out and about. Yeah, so these aren't complementary or alternative. They're primary neurological medicine. They address brain function in multiple levels. The effectiveness and modern research only has began to document all of these things, these ways of knowing, and have a title and a name to it. But these systems and advanced ways of thriving were existent for a very, very long time. So recommended readings, I shared those books with you. I think that, just my presentation today and the continued learning, it doesn't stop there. It has to be direct learning from knowledge keepers, but it again starts with that relationship and moving naturally and carefully from there. Acknowledging that many tribal people are experiencing these very realities that I'm sharing. So it's not always surface levels. So important reminders for each of you at the end of this presentation now is, books and training are good, but your approach to tribal communities should always be with respect and a carefulness and a slowness. Follow proper protocol from Indigenous people. And even what I share with you today is not to take and to use or claim as your own, because these are things that have been taught to me and experienced in my life with other real human beings that have experienced other things and challenges throughout their lives. So I'm having trust and I'm having humility and vulnerability in sharing these things. And I hope that it's respected. So offer appropriate compensation for Indigenous folks, that we're the lowest paid and if not, still not acknowledged at all for our ways of knowing and working and thriving in this world. I, for myself, an independent consultant, Indigenous woman practitioner, and I have bills too, and it is difficult. However, I'm centered on what I'm supposed to do, and I feel really grateful for that. However, I've done a lot of work on myself to advocate for my compensation and for my family's livelihood. And I believe that all of my grandmothers and grandfathers before me would be standing up very strong for that as well. So grateful for that. This is a lifelong journey. It's not a destination. So right now is just as important as the finish or the understanding. Right now is really vital. So we went through questions. I really appreciate reflections and questions. After this, I would just encourage you to write down more of your reflections. What are some memories that you hold on to, and what are some good intentions that you can apply those memories to? I think those are really inspirational ways of thinking and moving forward. So yeah, I just want to close this circle and I just really wanted to highlight and acknowledge that our ancestors hid stars in our wounds. I know for sure in my wounds. And those deepest pains have the greatest healing medicine, because I didn't know I would be here today, but I am, and I'm grateful for that. So the darkest night reveals the brightest stars, right? We know that. And post-traumatic growth, places of deepest pain become the source of our brightest wisdom. And wound and medicine share the same location in our body. So we can choose, or we can cultivate and nurture one more than the other. Healing transforms scars into light. Neural pathways created through trauma can be rewired through wisdom and resilience. Even the deepest neural grooves have historical trauma, can be transformed and healed. So we're not doomed. We carry medicine for 7 generations forward, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a great thing to to think about for me. So final words, thank you. In my language, and Mado. Thank you for your presence, attention, and willingness to engage with these teachings. The fact that Indigenous wellness approaches continues to resonate and offer healing today testifies to the wisdom of all of our grandmothers and grandfathers who preserved these practices, took care of them, worked with them, and relied on them through tremendous challenges. May we all recognize the healing that surrounds us and the resilience that lives within us. Aho, all my relations. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cass, and thank you all who are able to stay. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and come and see us again soon at a future training. Goodbye.